As you know, I often speak about mental health issues, and from time to time, I also deal with the context that we find on the Cape Flats. So you might be wondering, what on earth is this about? Have I now moved into climate change? The green screen picture behind me is the metaphor that I want to use to speak about mental health and the Cape Flats. So stay with me. Let's first take a walk down to the river. When we get a stench along the riverbed, we do an investigation and we may come across a lot of fish that have died and they are now rotting. Depending on how long they've been rotting, the smell will be worse. Now, if we were to take each one of these fish and we were to have a look at what killed it, we'd most likely find that it is exactly the same thing. We are not going to be so foolish to think that we're going to go through every single fish. We normally take one or two, or well, scientists who work on riverbeds, I'm not one of them, would take a sample. They'd maybe go a little further upstream as well, and they'll take a sample there. And then just from that little bit of sample, they'll see a pattern. And then they'll realize, okay, the water's been poisoned, or there is some kind of chemical, or the alkaline levels or the pH levels, I don't know, whatever those type of people do. And then they'll realize that this problem, where the fish have washed up and they are now rotting, actually started further up. So what they won't do, they're not going to throw some kind of magical solution or little tablet that is going to change the water or the pH or deal with the chemical problem in this area. It's not going to solve the problem. The reality is that the problem is all the way up there. Probably wherever the source of the river is, there is a problem way up there, and that problem is what we call an upstream problem, and it is now causing an impact lower down the stream or maybe midstream, and as a result we are seeing the result of it downstream, where the water is most shallow and all those dead fish have actually washed up. Now, I think it's pretty obvious, but for those who don't get it, the situation that we see on the Cape Flats and that we have seen on the Cape Flats for very many years is really the symptom, a downstream symptom of a problem that is way up at the top, an upstream problem. And I will speak about the upstream problems in the next video, in part 2, and maybe part 3 and 4, who knows. But this problem right here is what we see every day. This is drugs. This is alcohol abuse. This is molestation of children. This is violent behavior. This is mothers unaliving their children. This is all those kinds of things. Now, other people speak a lot about the justice and the advocacy and all that type of thing, and that's very important because we do need for there to be a wake-up call further upstream, and that's really what advocacy and those kind of protest action is all about. But for those of us who focused here, every time we look at an individual who has a drug problem, every time we look at an individual who acts out violently, every time we look at an individual who causes havoc in their family, every time we look at an individual problem of any kind, depression, anxiety, we're taking one of these fish. But all of the fish have the same problem, and that problem starts way upstream. Let's use the terminology now. It starts way upstream. So, yes, we are not dealing with fish on the Cape Flats. We are dealing with human beings. And the individual people do need individual support, absolutely. We want to have a more humane approach to dealing with the kind of social ills that we are seeing. But focusing only on this, making sure that we bring one or two fish to justice because of what they did, and so it should be. I'm not arguing against that. It's not going to solve the problem that is in fact upstream. I'll speak more about this in another video. In part 2, we're going to have a deeper look at what's going on inside of this river. So in part one, I spoke about the fact that I'm using a metaphor to explain how some of the symptoms and the problems that we see, or downstream kinds of symptoms, are actually a result of much bigger issues that are going on further upstream in the same river. But we tend to concentrate on this and not deal with the problem that is located upstream. So let's have a closer look at this area downstream. At the downstream level, we are looking mostly at the kinds of behaviors that we see from individuals. So this could range from depression and anxiety because people are dealing with all kinds of trauma, or it could be more serious like post-traumatic stress disorder, or because the trauma is not over, it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We also see individuals getting involved with violence. So either they are the perpetrators of violence or they become victim to violence. We see a rise in criminality and individuals finding their way into the underworld of crime for various reasons. We see bullying, and it goes further to become assault on other human beings. Then we obviously see the big problem of substance abuse. And at the point that the person is dependent on the substance, it now becomes a mental health disorder. We see a lot of social dysfunction, children not being able to form good relationships, and then we see intellectual dysfunction, which leads to another problem, and that is that they fall out of the schooling system and then are even more at risk for the crime and the things I spoke about earlier. And then we see self-harm, and at its worst presentation, we see suicide, right? But all of that is only this downstream area. The problem is not here. This is how it shows up, and it begins to give us the stench that we're seeing coming from the Cape Flats right now, with people having so much suffering. So let's go a little bit further up. Let's go to midstream. Midstream, we really are beginning to look at the social aspect, not the individual, but the social. And here we're talking about family, we're talking about communities, immediate communities around where the individual is living. So we all know that we see so much of family breakdown. Sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it's violence, where one family member is unalived, etc. We also see a lot of single parenting, and because of the kinds of problems downstream, we also see very young people falling pregnant and then having to become parents while they are still children. We see so much of abuse and neglect and domestic violence, right? So all of this breakdown in the social fiber. Now we also see a lot of gangsterism a little bit further upstream. And the reason we see gangsterism is because the family is failing to provide that sense of belonging, that sense of protection. So young people then turn to gangs to go and find that sense of belonging, importance, protection, etc. Then unfortunately, in South Africa, we simply see that there is an absolute lack of intervention. So the few intervention services that are provided are completely ineffective. They're not able to meet the demand, and as a result, they pretty much don't serve a purpose. And then we also see that there are no social institutions. Religious institutions are included here as social institutions, but they have absolutely no capacity, no agency to make a change in the social area, which is that sort of midstream area. And then we hop across or over to upstream. Now we're going to go way upstream, but for now, let's just go first level upstream. So at this point, we're now seeing cultural kinds of problems. And we have a culture in our country of gender-based violence. It's a whole culture. The way that it is perpetuated, etc., it's inside of our culture. We have a culture of corruption. It almost doesn't make it to the news anymore because it's just become part of the DNA of our culture. We have a culture of poverty. We'll go further upstream to see where that came from, but we have a culture of poverty. We have a culture of unemployment. The statistics prove that it is part of a way of life for us, unfortunately. We have a culture of housing insecurity, where people are either finding themselves homeless or in overcrowded spaces, or not knowing when they are going to be evicted because some person abroad has an eye on the property. We also have a culture of food insecurity, and you only need to look at the soup kitchens to realize the amount of hunger that people are experiencing. And now we go way upstream. And way upstream is where the problem really begins. This is the source. So first of all, we know that we have a culture of oppression, a history of oppression. This is the political historical level. We have a history of oppression for a very brief period, since 1948 to the 90s. We call that apartheid. And we are tempted to think that it was only in that period. Apartheid still exists, and it is, it started before 1652, as we all know by now. We also have a history of forced removals, where people were forced from their land, forced from their homes, and forced from their social networks. So you see that problem that was happening midstream, where we don't have social institutions, we don't have a connection to one another socially. Remember, that was midstream. Now if we go upstream and further upstream to the political and the historical level, we find out that they didn't wake up one day and decide we don't want to have good social networks. No. Many, many centuries ago, forced removals from land, and then during apartheid, forced removals from homes and land, happened and broke every thread of connection that people had. Then, of course, we have the tot system, and as you know, the tot system was so successful that by 1838, they had a whole community addicted and dependent, which meant it was a mental health problem in 1838 already. So now we move to the design, and I've spoken about that in previous videos, but I always speak about the artillery of apartheid. And it wasn't just the removal, it wasn't just a removal from land, it wasn't just colonization, it wasn't just racialization. They also had very dark forces that were instrumental in the Mandrax problem on the Cape Flats. I think even now we have videos of people, the culprits, confessing on video how they started to ensure that there would be a Mandrax addiction. We have a history of destabilizing communities, divide and conquer. And I also want to say that the gang thing that I spoke about midstream, that is not just because young people are trying to find an alternative to a sense of home, belonging, protection. That is because that system is very much engineered by the apartheid system. And so it's very organized. If you know anything about the number system and all of that kind of thing, you will know how very much it was engineered by the oppressors. You can put this video on 1.5 speed. I couldn't speak any faster, otherwise I would stumble over my words too much. Part 3, coming soon. Let us now summarize the root causes of some of the problems that we are seeing and experiencing on the Cape Flats. In part 1, I explained why I was using this metaphor of a river with loads of dead and rotting fish, and I was hoping that it could help us understand what's really going on. In part 2, we went into detail as to exactly what's going on in this river. We started off by looking at the downstream level, where individuals show up with all kinds of challenges and behavior problems. So we looked at the depression and the anxiety, the post-traumatic stress disorder, the substance abuse, addiction, and dependence. And we realize that a lot of these problems downstream happen because there's a problem slightly further up midstream, and that is because there is a problem at the social level, the level of family and community. But at the end of the video, we realize that the problem is even further up at a political level. So if we work our way backwards, we need to be aware of the fact that the reason why all these fish are showing up dead and rotting downstream is because the entire river is poisoned. And the reason the entire river is poisoned is because the toxin or the poison has its root or entered the river at the source. That is the systemic level. Systemic system. So political systems, economic systems, social systems, and then, of course, our legacy of oppression and all of the historical injustice that caused a breakdown midstream in the social fiber, which then leads to the kinds of problems that we're seeing now at the individual level. I am hoping that you'd be able to go back to part 1 and part 2 to get more of information there. But as we tackle this, whether we are activists, whether we are mental health professionals, or those people as community health workers, wherever you plug into the solution, let us remember why we are seeing what we are seeing downstream and how it is we think or we intend to tackle what is happening upstream at the source of the river where we have all of this toxin.